Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I'm Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. In Afghanistan, US President Joe Biden says there's a long way off from recognizing the Taliban. Meanwhile, the Chinese ambassador has promised to provide humanitarian aid during a meeting with senior Taliban officials. Earlier, the Taliban said they hope for good relations with China and cooperation in all areas. Israeli fighter jets have launched air raids on the Gaza Strip, violating the May ceasefire with Hamas yet again. In a tweet, the Israeli army claimed to have struck a military compound and a rocket manufacturing site belonging to Hamas. They said the attack in the vicinity of Khan Yunis city was in response to alleged incendiary balloons launched from the Strip. Pakistan is observing Air Force Day with patriotic zeal today. The day is celebrated to relive the memory of 1965 war when Pakistani pilots inflicted humiliating defeat on India. Special events are being organized to pay homage to the war heroes. Myanmar's shadow government has declared a people's defensive war against the country's military, which seized power in a coup on February 1st. In a speech, the acting president of the National Unity Government, Dua Lashi La, urged all the citizens to revolt against the rule of the military terrorists in every corner of the country. Mexico has reported over 300 daily COVID-19 deaths and more than 5,000 infections in the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, Pakistan has registered nearly 100 new COVID-19 fatalities and over 3,300 cases in the last 24 hours. Globally, the COVID-19 caseload has topped 221 million, while the death toll has reached over 4.57 million. And in tennis, world number one Novak Djokovic scrapped his way to a 1-6, 6-3, 6-2 and 6-2 win over Jenson Brooksby to move into the US Open quarterfinals. Meanwhile, fourth-seeded Alexander Zverev also stormed to the next round by beating Jannik Sinner 6-4, 6-4 and 7-6. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. We'll start from Afghanistan, where US President Joe Biden says there is a long way off from recognizing the Taliban. More on the latest in Afghan situation in this report.
The top U.S. diplomats are on a tour to Gulf states and Germany as Washington seeks support for the evacuation. During a meeting in Doha, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin thanked Amir for Qatar's support in evacuation. In a statement, State Department said the two sides also discussed initiatives to promote regional security and prosperity. Besides, Blinken also spoke with Kuwaiti Foreign Minister Sheikh Ahmed Nasser Al Mohammed Al Sabah and thanked him for Kuwait's assistance in the safe transit. It came as the State Department pulled out 4 Americans from Afghanistan in the first such departure. Meanwhile, Taliban official Maulvi Abdul Salam Hanafi met the Chinese ambassador to Afghanistan in Kabul. The Taliban spokesperson said Beijing has promised to provide humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. Earlier, the Taliban said they hope for good relations with China and cooperation in all areas.
Pakistan is observing Air Force Day with patriotic zeal today. The day is celebrated to mark the memory of the 1965 war when Pakistani pilots inflicted humiliating defeat on India. The Indian Air Force launched a clandestine attack on Lahore at Burki border, but it failed miserably after valiant resistance by military officers like Major Raja Aziz Bhatti Shahid. Pakistan Air Force pilot Muhammad Mahmood Alam shot down 5 Indian Air Force Hawker Hunter fighters in less than a minute. He became history's only jet ace in a day in 100 years history of the world aircraft. On this occasion, special events are being organized to pay homage to the war heroes. As Pakistan honors its armed forces and martyrs of the war, former squadron leader Akbar Ghani recalls the Wagah mission with Indus News. More in this report by our correspondent Manahil Ahmed.
The 6th of September represents Pakistan's valiant armed forces who rebuffed the Indian attack with full vigor. Colonel retired Zafar Cheema was in the Pakistan Military Academy when the Indian forces launched an attack without a declaration of war. He said during the war, the duration of his training increased to 15 hours per day in Kakul.
The remaining period of the training in the PMA, we just underwent the military training, the drills, and the tactical studies and all. And our duration of sea training was increased from 12 hours to 15 hours.
After completing his training, he was commissioned to his unit in the Sialkot Center where the biggest tank battle was fought. He said despite the ceasefire, the Indians tried to capture more area.
Ceasefire had taken place, but still the enemy was still deployed and we were facing each other face to face. So during my stay at the border during the ceasefire, our unit officers used to do a lot of patrolling and we were safeguarding the border sea which was assigned to us, and it was in the Charwa sector. During this period in my unit, Indians tried a couple of times to capture more area. So we also attacked them and dislodged them.
Cheema said the morale and purpose of Pakistani forces were high enough to attain victory despite being outnumbered by the enemy. Manahil Ahmed, Indus News, Islamabad.
Now, Pakistan is observing Air Force Day with patriotic zeal today, and the day is celebrated to relive the memory of 1965 war when Pakistani pilots inflicted humiliating defeat on India. Now, to talk more about this, we have with us Air Marshal retired Masood Akhtar. So, welcome to Indus News. Now, tell us what lessons were learned from the air war of 1965.
Big ones. I think number one, that when you have good leadership, and Noor Khan was an Iron Man. He led from the front, he demanded discipline from his air warriors, and he had trained them very well. And to top it all, his strategy was good. He decided to preempt. Air Marshal Arjun Singh was his colleague from the erstwhile pre-partition Indian Air Force, and I think he competed very well. And his pilots, people like late Rafiqi, Yunus, Middlecourt, Cecil Chaudhary, Alauddin Butch Ahmed, Air Commodore Sajjad Haider presently, and then he was a squadron leader. When they flew on the 6th, and before that on 1st of September, they had written a tale of excellence and bravado and courage and guts and grit, which has very few parallels. And when we look at the quotations about the 65 war, generally when they talk of the overall war, we think it was a stalemate. But people like Chuck Yeager, people like Chuck Horner, Chuck Yeager, who was the first one to go supersonic in the world in the X-1, and Chuck Horner, who was the JFAC, Joint Air Force Component Commander in Gulf War I, they have nothing but praise for Pakistan Air Force. Chuck Horner says during Gulf War I, he was only scared of the Iraqi pilots who were trained by the Pakistanis. When the Pakistanis, because they're thinking people, when the Pakistanis told them that, look, they are being controlled on the radar by an archaic control system, he said he took a sigh of relief. That now it is not going to be any problem. But if somebody gave him a difficulty during Gulf War I, these were the pilots who were trained by the likes of Rafiqi and Yunus and Cecil Chaudhary and Middlecourt. And in fact, in 71, the traditions that they left behind, a single number 14 squadron with 14 to 16 aeroplanes flew against, you know how many squadrons? 13. 13 fighter squadrons means 13 into 16, something like 160, 200 aeroplanes. So 14 versus 160 to 200 aeroplanes, and they had a kill ratio again of 1:3. In 65 war also, we had a kill ratio of 1:345. And the numbers, Indian Air Force was something like 700 frontline combat aeroplanes, and ours were 260. So a force larger than 1/3 plus 3 times the Pakistan Air Force. Noor Khan had an edge, and he won air superiority right on 1st September when the war was not on. And on 1st of September, late Rafiqi and Flight Lieutenant Imtiaz Bhatti, they shot 2 vampires each over Chamjodiyan, right over River Tavi, where the armor, Indian armor and Pakistani armor was bumper to bumper. And you know what they did? They wrote off a big flight of Oregons, which was a French aeroplane, and the vampires, and something like 160 to 200 aeroplanes were taken out of the fight. So 1/3 of the Indian Air Force was taken out on 1st of September just because Rafiqi and Imtiaz Bhatti Saab shot 2 aeroplanes each, and they said vampires and Oregons will not be able to survive the war. So that was the kind of feat of leadership, of courage, grit, and training and discipline.
Wow, this is unbelievable to believe, but the fact is Pakistan Air Force has proven its mettle whenever it is tested now. How did the air war affect the outcome of the conflict?
Well, the air war, we had air superiority, relative air superiority. Let us not forget that the Indian Air Force also is a professional air force. They also flew low altitude, 150 nautical miles into Sargodha and Peshawar, and had air combat at the edge of their endurance and range with the Pakistani pilots. There was this Flight Lieutenant Devia who comes in a mist year, and he does slow speed scissors with an F-104. And eventually, in one of the passes, in the effort to get behind one another, they collide. Flight Lieutenant Amjad, he later on rose to be an Air Vice Marshal. He ejects out of the 104, gets a Sitara Jurat, and Flight Lieutenant Devia, he goes down with the aeroplane. He was given a Paramveer Chakra. So notwithstanding that the Indian Air Force is also a professional air force, Noor Khan had an edge. And once I asked him, I said, sir, he was much too senior to me. I asked him, sir, you won the air war. What happened, the air battle, what happened to the war? Actually, the outcome of the war was a very, very fortunate for us and for India also, a stalemate. We wanted to go across into Kashmir and liberate Kashmir through Gibraltar, failed. India wanted to decimate us as a nation and as a military, they failed. And the likes of Rafiqi and Yunus and Aziz Bhatti and Shami, they were the ones who at the tactical level gave their blood. And they were able to not only save Pakistan against an enemy that was 5 times, both in all 3, Army, Navy and Air Force. And that is why the Army Chief very rightly said last evening that the military is fully ready for all conventional and unconventional threats. And we proved it over and over again, 71. We proved it in Kargil. We proved it in the Afghan war. But more importantly, we proved it on 19th February 2019, when the traditions of all these erstwhile giants that I have mentioned, their tales were replicated by smaller people, I mean in terms of junior, they were very junior. Noman Siddiqui, Wing Commander Noman and Siddiqui, Squadron Siddiqui, when Noman shot Abhinandan and Siddiqui shot an Su-30. So we should be very humble in our attitude, thank Allah, but also look forward to the tradition that were left behind by these very, very tall people. And the Pakistan Air Force has done well. The Army has just taken care, not just, but about 10 years back, took care of an insurgency which is very difficult, messy, and which was complex. But the Pakistan Army, supported by the Pakistan Air Force, and had Pakistan Air Force not supported, we would have lost many, many more men in Waziristan and Zarb-e-Azm and all these efforts. So we took care of the insurgency. We have a huge threat today. And when the army chief says there can be terrorism, the TTP is not died and it's not out, it can give us problems, but he said we are fully ready, and I entirely agree with him.
Now, talking about that, former DG ISPR, Mr. Asif Ghafoor, said that we gave India a bloody nose, and the Pakistan Armed Forces have made it a habit of giving India a bloody nose, be it on the history or at the present stage. Now, has India learned a lesson from February 27th dogfight?
I will not be arrogant. We should be humble about what we have done. But Asif Ghafoor is absolutely right. We taught them a lesson. What lesson has India learned? Please remember, when in broad daylight, whereas they came in the thick of night and they lobbed their weapons, we say from a distance, they dropped their weapons, they got hold of a cow, of a crow and a few pine trees. Then we went in next day in broad daylight and re-established, and I'm a very proud sky blue warrior. We re-established military deterrence and political deterrence, all by a single service application. Please remember, Munib, air power in certain conditions can achieve political and military ends by itself, in certain conditions. It will always need boots on ground to fight their way through, supported by the air, and of course in the south, supported by the maritime forces, by the Pakistan Navy, but we re-established. India did not have the guts to relaunch an effort against this. They did not reciprocate by launching another. What have they learned? That the strategic strikes on ground failed. They have absolutely, General Huda, who oversaw this, he has not given an iota of evidence of these strategic strikes on ground, which we've been clamoring for, asking for in the international press. When they launched the airstrike, they thought they can stay below the nuclear threshold and do anything in the air to teach Pakistan a lesson. They could not. So they have chosen not to relaunch a military effort, a smaller one also. But where is the difficulty? India has got a huge military. It cannot employ, and we also know, we tried once in Kashmir, we tried second time in Kashmir, we tried third time in Kargil. In Kargil, we also found that military application has its severe limitations. But India has even bigger limitations, and that is nobody, the powers that be, will not allow India to launch a full-fledged war of 10 days to a month. If they don't do that from north to south, they will not generate their full combat power. Case in point, when the parliament was struck, in their case, they tried to launch a full-fledged war. America said, stop, stop, stop. They said, no, we are not stopping. We must decimate Pakistan into many pieces. So what did the Americans do? They launched, they gave a travel advisory to their people in Bangalore, etc. So when the Americans moved out, were moving out, the Europeans also said there is threat, so they're all. So the Indians said, please stop, we are not doing anything. So that is the limit of application of military power. Likewise in Bombay, the post-Bombay. If they want to test our resolve within Kashmir, now that is a small area in terms of the airspace above and on the ground. If they bring in 2, 3, 4, 5 corps, we can also take them there and keep the defensive balance in the center and in the south. They will bring in their 2, 3, 4, 5 elite squadrons, fighter squadrons to Kashmir. We can also do that. We have all the air bases in the north. We can also do that. And please remember, I want to give this good news to our viewers. Our Air Force leadership is full. I retired in 2005, so I don't know everything that is classified. But little that I know, by the beginning of next year, and by now Rafales with their Meteors are not operational fully. They've been flying, of course, across the LAC, in Ladakh, etc. But we will have a good antidote to Rafale in the form of J-10, possibly, and the PL-15. And remember, the J-10 is 4.5 generation fighter. And its PL-15 and its AISA radar are supposedly better than that of. So people, the Pakistan Air Force air warriors do not only train hard, and they train with grit, courage and belief, but our leadership is fully cognizant of the threats that India, when Modi said, had we had Rafales, things would have been different. So I think we have not done bad. We should not be arrogant, we should be humble. They are also a professional military. But with a small military, Army, Navy and Air Force, look at Dwarka. I know Admiral Tasneem, he's a great elder and a great friend, Sitara Jurat and Bar in 71. Through a small submarine, commanding a small submarine in the thick of the depths of Arabian Sea, Hangor, and he sunk the Kukri. And the Indians were taken aback. Just because of that, they could not launch a second strike onto Karachi. Because in the first strike, they had left the Karachi refinery aflame. And so like the Army chief said yesterday, the Army is ready, the Air Force is ready, the Navy is ready. The only thing required is the nation must be put together. It doesn't come together all by itself. Political leaders have to do that. Under, like we discussed in some of the programs, one national identity, which should be a correct one, a Pakistani Pakistan. One common purpose, one set of vital national interests. These are some of the problems that we have. Otherwise, 6th and 7th September, and tomorrow probably the Navy is going to celebrate. We haven't done bad at all. But I think we should be humble and pray to God. We will do even better.
Inshallah, we shall do. Now, sir, with your experience, put us some sense into this question and also apprise our audience. What is the reason behind India's jingoistic mindset, and do you think it's getting worse with time?
Absolutely. It is unfortunate that Narendra Modi, coming into power with the hubris and the arrogance that he has, to turn it into a Hindutva state. We did our since 47, small, bit by bit by bit. Narendra Modi did it in 1 month. When he undid the 370, he undid the 35A, and he brought in the Citizenship Amendment Act. The secular forces, the moderate people were up in arms against Modi. He may not win, I hope I'm right. He may not win the next elections, but he has done unterminable damage to India-Pakistan relations, where now we are ready to fully talk to India. And they say, don't even talk to the Hurriyat people, otherwise we're not going to talk. This is arrogance and hubris. And they will also suffer. We also have tended to suffer, but they're going to suffer more. So this just thumping jingoism that Hindus are the best, this is a far more misplaced doctrine that is going to damage India. But let me, coming back to 6th September, what is the edge that big lesson that we bring of leadership? I'll bring in myself this aspect. You know, Noor Khan had freshly taken over 3 months back from Asghar Khan as the commander-in-chief. And that is when 65 war comes. Number one, the nation must know that the Field Marshal, General Musa and Akhtar Malik never told the Air Force that there is going to be an Operation Gibraltar. So Noor Khan finds out just by accident, and he goes to Field Marshal and he says, sir, this is going to lead to war. So he says, no, this is a small operation. He goes to Field Marshal, then he goes to Akhtar Malik, and then he says that, okay, you think it's not going to lead to war, but let me ask you a question. How are you going to support these mujahideen? They said, oh, yes, we will need your support in this. They should have told the Pakistan Air Force. So, lo and behold, the first C-130 sortie that is flown to support the mujahideen from Chaklala, I think it was Group Captain, Wing Commander or Air Commodore E.G. Hall, who was on the controls of that C-130. And the Commander-in-Chief comes with his flag and he says, I'm going to be on the flight deck. There, you can't do that. If we get shot down, if we have any problem, we will have no face to show. Noor Khan insisted on leading from the front. Second instance, when late Rafiqi and Imtiaz Bhatti are having combat with 4 vampires, and the vampire, they were about 12 of them, and then they were Mistiers, 2 F-36s, and they shoot 4 vampires. This very, very gutsy Commander-in-Chief in an L-19, and he's the Commander-in-Chief, he's flying with a lieutenant or a captain of Pakistan Army Aviation in an L-19 down below at, let's say, 500 to 1,000 feet. And this combat is taking place around, let's say, 10,000 plus. And late Rafiqi Sahib, Imtiaz Bhatti Sahib told me this. He gives him a call that, number 2, let us look out because we are firing, so we don't shoot our own chief. So after everything is over and he's monitoring the radio, so his own T-37, and Noor Khan used to fly from the front. So he goes back to Rawali, picks up his T-37, goes to Sargodha, and he embraces Rafiqi and Imtiaz Bhatti, and they get an SJ each. And so that is the kind of leadership we had. So people will give their life for such leadership. And I think we have done that. One more instance that I will tell you about leadership. Late Rafiqi, and this was told at least twice, thrice by Cecil Chaudhary Sahab to us. The sun is setting. Pathankot has been struck. Devastating effect. They destroyed about 12 aeroplanes. Late Rafiqi and Cecil Chaudhary are sitting on a bench. Now that is the time Air Force and Army and Navy used to have benches and cane chairs and no air conditioner. Today we have much more. And surprise has been lost. You can see the twilight and the darkness settle in. And Cecil Chaudhary is a flight lieutenant and Rafiqi Saab is a squad leader. And Cecil Chaudhary says to Rafiqi, he said, sir, why don't you talk to the station commander? It's pointless going at this time. Rafiqi had spoken with the station commander and probably they had had a word with the CNC also. So Rafiqi gets a little annoyed and he says, Cecil Chaudhary, you don't want to come on this mission? There are 5, 10 more people who are wanting to come on this mission. You know what Cecil says? Cecil Saab says, sir, even if you are going to hell, I will follow you there. So Rafiqi Saab feels very good about it, about his own self and about what Cecil Chaudhary tells. And then they declare the aeroplanes, and so Yunus, Rafiqi, and they're walking toward their aeroplanes. And Cecil Saab says, Cecil Saab also has now passed away after a meritorious innings in the education after he retired in St. Mary's, his alma mater. So Rafiqi says, Cecil, come here. So Cecil Chaudhary Saab comes and he says, Cecil, I'm sorry. Your wife is never going to forgive me for where I'm taking you. We may not come back. You know what Cecil says? He said, sir, if we don't come back, let her think what she wants to think. Because we will no more be there. We must go and do our bit. And now Rafiqi goes there and Rafiqi shoots, and they are intercepted 3 aeroplanes by 6 hunters right over Halwara. And Rafiqi shoots one, he's the leader. Yunus takes out another one. He's another independent element. Cecil Saab is number 2. He's sticking to the tail of, to clearing the tail of the leader. And Rafiki has his guns jammed. With guns jammed, he should have gotten out of that area because you are a sitting duck. And should have told the same thing to Cecil. But because they are attacked by a swarm of hunters, so he says, Cecil, you have the lead. So Cecil takes over the lead and he falls behind as his wingman. Cecil takes out one hunter and Rafiki Saab is shot one by one. And of course, the flight surgeon who went to the wreckage, he says there was this blonde, tall, well-built Pakistani air warrior. So he's probably buried somewhere close to it. So these are the kind of tales of leadership which the Pakistani commanders and their number 2s and number 3s and number 4s blazed for all of us to follow. And I'm glad. We are retired. I wear this sky blue jacket today and I wear an F-16 and a JF-17 Typhoon. Humbly proud of what our air warriors have done, and I'm glad Noman and Hassan Siddiqui did not let us down.
Absolutely, and our armed forces shall not let us down in the future as well. Air Marshal Retired Masood Akhtar, thank you so much for being with us here in our studio and sharing your experiences about the 1965 war and Pakistan Air Force's ability to give a bloody nose to all the enemies of Pakistan. Thank you so much, and now we shall move on with our other news stories. Now we have with us Air Commodore retired Dr. Ziaul Haq Shamsi, defense analyst from Islamabad. Thank you for your time, sir. Now, tell us, sir, why do you think India chose the path of aggression in 1965?
Actually, India was perhaps left with no option, and they probably miscalculated the resolve of Pakistan armed forces and the people of Pakistan. And they thought that they will be able to cow down Pakistan armed forces, and that is why perhaps they decided to impose a war on Pakistan. And perhaps their intelligence failed to visualize or report to the government that Pakistan was already prepared for it, especially Pakistan Air Force, which was already prepared for any kind of misadventure by the Indians. And this miscalculation, whenever war breaks out, it is the outcome of certain miscalculations by the leadership which gives a go-ahead for the war. And India did make that mistake in 1965 and perhaps again in 2019.
Also, sir, how did Pakistan manage to defeat an army many times bigger and better equipped at that time?
Yeah, I think a very, very pertinent question. Preparation, initiative, courage. Because Pakistan Armed Forces decided to take the war into enemy land, which the Indians were not expecting. Because general rule is 1:3, and India was already 4 times larger. So they thought that they will be able to cow down the Pakistan Armed Forces because they are numerically superior. And at that time, they had the equipment also and wherewithal to undertake that kind of operation, which they thought they have carefully planned. But this is where they made the mistake, because when they crossed the international border, they were surprised that the Pakistan was prepared and more than their expectation. The response was very swift, particularly from the Air Force, because Air Force, the way it came in for the support of Pakistan Army, it actually impeded the advance of Indian Army in Chavanda and the Cham sector and in the Lahore zone as well. So that is where India failed to, as you say, the Chinese sage Sun Tzu, that you must know your enemy. And if you know the enemy, you need not to worry about the outcome of the battle. India did not know Pakistan as a prepared enemy. whereas Pakistan knew what India would do and what India can do. This is very important, and that is why Pakistan being numerically inferior as far as the number was concerned, and we were outnumbered in every department. I mean, be it Pakistan Army, be it Pakistan Air Force, be it Pakistan Navy. But the way we performed and outperformed, that was because of the leadership's offensive mindset. We decided to take the war into their land, which they did not expect. They thought it will be a walkover and they will have evening tea in Lahore Gymkhana. So that is where I think they miscalculated, and they don't have a face to show. Even after so many decades of this war, we very proudly celebrate this day because we proved equal to the task.
Right. Also, do we have heroes like Rafiki, Cecil and Yunus in the PAF right now as well?
February 19 is not too far back in the history, isn't it? Broad daylight, within 10 minutes, 2 fighter jets downed, isn't it? One of them falling inside Pakistani controlled territory, and the pilot was captured and gracefully returned after necessary documentation, isn't it? So Pakistan, Alhamdulillah, and armed forces in general and Pakistan Air Force in particular leads the way. Actually, whenever Pakistan's airspace is challenged or the international boundary is challenged. And we did that in 65, and we've done that, Alhamdulillah, in 2019 as well. That because this is how you build your credibility. The psychological ascendancy which Pakistan Air Force gained over 4 times larger Indian Air Force in 1965 is maintained till this date. And that is why in 2019, when Prime Minister of Pakistan announced that India, if carries out any misadventure, Pakistan will not think, it will act. And that is what we did. Broad daylight on 27th morning, whereas a night before, India had carried out the airspace violation and undertook an unsuccessful airstrike in Balakot area, destroying only 4 or 5 trees over there. Whereas when Pakistan's Prime Minister had warned them, but they did not take him seriously, and they thought that these are mere rhetoric words. But when the Pakistan Air Force chief said that, sir, we are ready, and he got a go-ahead, and very next day, broad daylight, 10 o'clock in the morning, within 10 minutes, 2 aeroplanes are down. And now India does not have a face. I mean, just claiming that they have also downed an F-16, whereas the Americans did their countdown in Pakistan. And recently, I think Christine Fair has also told in India that no, you were not able to shoot down their F-16. It's a false claim. Whereas we were able to show the debris of the downed aircraft and the pilot also. So nation should not have any doubt that Rafiqis and Alams and Shabirs and yours are reborn or not. The raw talent is available throughout the Pakistan. What Pakistan Air Force does it, that recruits them on merit, trains them with whatever resources we have, and polishes them and hones them into Rafiqis and Alams and yours, and that is why we have Hassans and Nomans even in 2021, 2019.
Right, so lastly, doctrinal implications in contemporary times in regional air war possibilities, sir.
I think it's an ongoing process. Doctrinal changes, they keep on evolving. But one thing is for sure, that air power is an offensive weapon, and it has to be employed offensively. This is what Pakistan Air Force taught the world in 1965, being smaller, but carried out an offensive defense strategy and proved its worth. Whereas in 1989, the Gulf War I, in Operation Desert Storm, the same was repeated by Allied and NATO forces against almost not comparable air force, that is Iraqi Air Force. And within first 100 hours, air dominance was achieved by them. And since then, air power leading the way or leading the future war has become the mantra. Whereas Pakistan Air Force had proved it back in 1965. And the same was repeated, Alhamdulillah, on February 27, 2019. So it's a continuous process with the advancement in technology. The air strategy keeps evolving. But remember, air power is an offensive weapon. It cannot be deployed by passive manner.
Absolutely, and Pakistan Air Force certainly is the pride of Pakistan. Air Commodore retired Dr. Ziaul Haq Shamsi, thank you for talking to Indus News. Now, Israeli fighter jets have launched air raids on the Gaza Strip, violating the May ceasefire with Hamas yet again. In a tweet, Israeli army claimed to have struck a military compound and a rocket manufacturing site belonging to Hamas. It said the attack in the vicinity of Khan Yunis city was in response to alleged incendiary balloons launched from the Strip. Palestinian media said the Israeli F-16s bombed two sites with missiles and completely destroyed citizens' property. It said lately the Israeli military's F-16 jets are flying intensively in the airspace of the besieged Strip. Now, France has called on Iran to provide a full explanation about the presence of undeclared nuclear material in the country. A French Foreign Ministry spokesperson said Paris fully supports the UN nuclear watchdog's efforts to clarify the state of Tehran's nuclear program. At a press briefing, the official added that Iran must immediately resume full cooperation with the agency. Paris also urged Iran to confirm implementation of temporary measures under a bilateral deal with the agency. Earlier, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Saeed Khatibzadeh said the watchdog's political use can prompt a different response from Tehran. He said negotiations on the revival of the nuclear deal will resume, but they must guarantee Iran's interests. Now, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has condemned the terrorist attack that targeted security forces in Iraq's Kirkuk governorate. 13 Iraqi security troops were killed in the attack. The OIC stressed the need to support Iraq's efforts in combating terrorism and violent extremism. Earlier, ISIS claimed responsibility for an overnight attack on a security post near the Iraqi city of Kirkuk. Moving on, Myanmar's shadow government has declared a people's defensive war against the country's military, which seized power in a coup in February 1st. In a speech, the acting president of the National Unity Government, Dua Lashi La, urged all the citizens to revolt against the rule of the military terrorists in every corner of the country. He called on the exiled government's People's Defense Force to strike every pillar of the junta's ruling mechanism and to protect the lives of citizens. Dua Lashi La also urged local administrators working under the junta to resign immediately. Advocacy groups say the military has killed over 1,000 civilians in a crackdown on dissent so far. South Korea has reportedly test-fired a submarine-launched ballistic missile, becoming the first non-nuclear weapons country to develop such a capability. Officials say the underwater ejection tests were carried out from the Dosan Ahn Chang-hu submarine. It is a locally developed 3,000-ton class submarine fitted with 6 vertical launching tubes. The missile has a range of around 500 kilometers and is believed to be a variant of the country's Hyunmoo 2B ballistic missile. Authorities say the weapon systems will be mass-produced for deployment after a round of additional tests. Now, Mexico has reported over 300 daily COVID-19 deaths and more than 5,000 infections in the last 24 hours. Globally, the COVID-19 caseload has topped 221 million, while the death toll has reached over 4.57 million. Details of this report.
for National Health Service to cover additional costs from the pandemic over the next 6 months. Europe too is evaluating data on a booster dose for Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine for people 16 years of age and older. The outbreak is in the hard-hit western suburbs of Australia's largest city, has spurred a spike in vaccination rate. Meanwhile, New Zealand is also finalizing arrangements to procure more vaccines.
We are now finalising arrangements that secure additional supply in September. This will enable us to maintain our extraordinary vaccination rates throughout September until our bulk deliveries land in October.
In Philippines, Manila residents have welcomed the announcement of a relaxation of restrictions by the government. However, Vietnam has extended curbs and jailed a person for 5 years for breaking strict quarantine rules and spreading the virus. India is bracing for a third wave as markets saw massive crowds of shoppers ahead of festive season.
This is a very auspicious festival in Maharashtra. That's why public has stepped out of houses to shop. They're following precautions like wearing masks, following distancing norms. I agree there is crowd at some places, congested places, but people are following precautions.
China has urged the US to be a supporter rather than a saboteur of international cooperation in the origins tracing of the coronavirus. In the US, the national debate over vaccine requirements have created a fraught situation for the first responders who are dying in large numbers. Cuba has become the first country in the world to vaccinate children from the age of 2 against COVID-19 using homegrown jabs not recognized by the World Health Organization. The Chilean health regulator has approved the Sinovac vaccine for use in children over 6 years of age.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported 98 deaths from COVID-19 over the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the tally of fatalities has reached 26,330. Instead, over 3,300 people contracted the virus overnight. The ministry said more than 92,000 cases are active, while over 5,400 are critical. Health officials say the country's caseload has crossed 1.1 million. Meanwhile, over 1,067,000 people have recovered. Now, in the US, Hurricane Ida has left widespread power outages and damaged homes in the country's southern states. Meanwhile, officials have warned of new thunderstorms and heavy rains in the region. President Joe Biden will visit New York and New Jersey today to view the destruction wrought by last week's storm. In Louisiana, more than 500,000 people are still without power, which the officials say is unlikely to be restored until the next few weeks. Over in New York, Governor Kathy Hochul said the Hurricane Ida caused damage of more than $50 million in the state. Meanwhile, the U.S. Coast Guard says it was probing nearly 350 reports of oil spills in and along the Gulf Coast in the wake of the hurricane. Ida, one of the most powerful hurricanes ever to strike the U.S. Gulf Coast, has left at least 57 dead in the country. American actor Michael K. Williams has been found dead in his New York apartment. Although this has not been officially confirmed, but local media quoted law enforcement sources saying that Williams died from a suspected drug overdose. The 54-year-old actor, who was nominated for 3 Emmy Awards and openly discussed his struggles with drugs over the years. Williams was the best known for starring in HBO drama series The Wire. Now, Asia-Pacific markets are trading mixed as investors remain cautious over imposition of curbs due to the rising COVID-19 cases. Stocks in mainland China added nearly 1.5%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng gained nearly 1%. Japan's Nikkei 225 also rose close to 1%. However, Seoul's Kospi shed over 0.5%. Shares in Australia are trading flat. And now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the world. Well, that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.